The wind dragged dust across the plains like a ghost, sweeping the land clean. There were no trees for miles except one, dead and clawed like a hand reaching skyward. From its twisted limb hung a young girl, barely 17. Her pale arms were bound by rawhide, wrists purple from strain, feet brushing the dry earth. Her head lolled forward, sunburn spreading across her cheeks and nose. Around her neck, tied with twine, swung a jagged board scrawled with blood-colored ink. Indian land. Flies hovered, feasting on cracked lips. Her gingham dress torn at the hem, one sleeve rip stirred weakly with the breeze. The prairie stretched silent, indifferent. From the crest of a distant bluff, the wind carried whispers of hoofbeats, then silence again. She stirred. The last thing Mary Ellen had remembered was her father shouting, guns, dust, her mother screaming her name. Then hands rough, angry, pulling her down from the wagon. Something cracked against her jaw, rope, laughter, the sun flaring like fire behind her eyelids, then nothing. But now there was pain, her arms ached, and her throat was raw. Her eyes fluttered open, her vision swam. Not far from the trail, a lone rider paused on the horizon. His silhouette shimmered under the noon heat. A narrow-faced Comanche man, mid to late 30s, rode a thin, sun-bleached pony. His name was Soho, though few spoke it anymore. Not the whites, not his own people. They called him Ghost, Traitor, Wind. He carried no rifle, only a bow strapped to the saddle and a bone-handled knife at his side. He did not come near. Not at first. His eyes narrowed when he saw the girl. His horse shifted nervously. So's face stone-like and unreadable tilted. Slightly, the sign, the rope, the dress. He had seen this before. Years ago, his own wife had hung from a cottonwood not far from here, her only crime being mercy, sheltering a white boy during winter. The soldiers had called it treason. His tribe had called her foolish. Soho had called it love. He clenched the reins. This is not my fight, he thought, but then her hand twitched. Not much, just a finger curling against the rope, but it was enough to break something in him. Enough to make him swing down from the saddle and walk, slow and silent, toward the tree. The pony snorted. The prairie held its breath. Soho pulled his knife. The blade slid through the bindings. The girl crumpled like a dropped rag doll. She hit the earth in a puff of dust. Her eyes fluttered. Her lips moved, no words, just breath. He crouched beside her, studied her face, so young. Bones like birds. A sound sharp and low-cut, quiet, not hers, his head turned. A black crow rose from the distant hill. Another followed. Eyes narrowing, Soho scanned the ridgeline. Shadows, motion. Too far to tell. Is this bait? He moved fast. Slipping his canteen from the saddle, he knelt beside her and uncorked it. Water dribbled across her lips. She coughed, weakly, but swallowed. She blinked and saw him. Her eyes widened. She screamed. Or tried to. Her throat gave out. Just a rasp, hoarse and terrified. She kicked backward, clawing at the ground, her hands dragging through grass and sand. He said nothing. Not in English, not in Comanche. Just looked at her, eyes steady, calm. She tried to scramble away, but her legs buckled. She collapsed again, wheezing. He stood and pulled a blanket from his saddle, laid it over her shoulders. Not tenderly, but not cruelly either. A gesture. She flinched, stared at him. Then a horse whinnied in the distance. Soho froze. Again the sound of hooves, several riding fast, a posse. Scouts? Settlers? He turned, eyes cutting through the sunlight. They had no time. In one motion he bent, lifted her light as dry twigs, and draped her across his arms. She struggled. Weakly, but his grip was firm. He turned his pony with a quiet whistle. Then, just as fast, he vanished into the ravine beyond the tree. And the prairie went still once more. The creek sang low through the stones, a steady whisper through a gash in the land that few dared to find. Soho moved through the underbrush like a shadow. Mary Ellen slumped across his back, her arms dangling, head lolling with every step. Her fever had broken, but only just. She was conscious enough to breathe on her own, to murmur faint sounds in her sleep. But the weight of shock still pinned her spirit to the dark dot at the mouth of a narrow cave chiseled into the base of a limestone. Bluff, Soho ducked inside. The cave smelled of ash and moss. A cold draft seeped from the rocks. This place had once been his exile, now a sanctuary. He laid her down gently on a bed of pine boughs and dry grass. She stirred but didn't wake Dot from his pouch. He crushed sage and dried yarrow, mixing them into a poultice with water from the creek. He unwrapped the rawhide burns around her wrists, angry, inflamed, leaking blood in thin streams, and smeared the green salve across them. Her eyes flinched. Then, slowly opened, she blinked at the ceiling, her breathing hitched. She turned her head and saw him. A flicker of terror crossed her face again. Her lips parted, but only air came out. No scream, no sound. He said nothing. Stood, walked across the cave and set down a chunk of smoked meat near her feet. Then unrolled his blanket on the far side, near the fire pit, and lay down with his back to her. She watched him, chest rising and falling. One hand reached slowly for the food. She didn't know if he meant to save her or keep her. All she knew was that he hadn't let her die. The flames cracked softly through the night. Shadows flickered on the cave wall like old ghosts dancing. Mary Ellen lay awake, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time since the tree. She remembered their wagon had stopped just south of the river crossing. Her father said they'd been cutting across reservation land, but that the treaty lines had shifted. He thought it was safe. It wasn't. They came at night, not Comanche white men, 6 of them. Dirty coats, whiskey breath, rifles slung low. They accused her father of settling where he shouldn't, of stirring up Indian blood. They called her mother a squaw lover. Called her worse. When her father drew his revolver, they pistol-whipped him to the dirt. Mary Ellen tried to scream, tried to pull her younger brother from the wagon, but someone grabbed her by the hair. They ripped her from the seat, tore her dress, tied her hands so tight her skin split. Then they tied her to the tree, said it was symbolic. Let them find her, one had sneered. Let them take what's owed? They rode off, laughing. She'd been left in silence. Her father, face down beside the trail, unwilling. Now, in the darkness of the cave. Mary Ellen whispered aloud, not to him, not to herself, but to the hollow ache in her chest. They wanted me to be blamed. For what they feared, Soho, across the fire, stirred. His eyes opened. He didn't move, but his gaze, dark, unreadable, shifted to her face. He understood. He didn't say it. But he understood. In the morning, he left early. When he returned, he carried a rabbit strung by its legs. He skinned it by the creek, cleaned the meat, and roasted it slowly over coals. The scent winding through the trees like memory. Mary Ellen sat up, weak but watching. She hadn't spoken since the night before. Her eyes followed the knife, the meat, the fire. Hunger tugged at her ribs, but she said nothing. He finished cooking. Tore the carcass in two. He gave her the better half. She stared at it. Her hands trembled as she took it. It was the first warm thing she'd held in days. She chewed slowly. The silence between them stretched like a line neither had the strength to cross. Then, after minutes of chewing, she looked at him, eyes not hard, but hollowed by grief. Her voice cracked. Why did you help me? He didn't answer right away. The fire popped. Then, softly, they want war. I am done with war. She looked at him. Really looked. For the first time, not as a savior, not as a savage. Not as a ghost or enemy or legend, but as a man sitting across a fire, like her, alone, like her, scarred. And in that long moment, she didn't speak again. She didn't need to. The fire was small, just enough to push the chill from their bones. Wind hissed through the canyon mouth, carrying the scent of creosote and ash. Soho sat with his legs crossed, staring into the flames as if they might tell him something new. Mary Ellen sat across from him, knees hugged to her chest, her dress still dirty, her skin still bruised. He hadn't spoken much in days, not since the cave, but tonight something changed. My wife's name was Toma, he said, voice low, rough like sand dragged over stone. Mary Ellen didn't respond, but her gaze lifted. One winter, a white boy, no older than you, came to our camp, lost, frozen near death. My wife wrapped him in our blanket, fed him, hid him when the cavalry came looking. He paused, stirred the embers with a stick. They found him anyway. Saad she had stolen him. Said it was an act of war. The fire popped. He didn't flinch. They took her, dragged her behind a horse, burned the hut. Left me her teeth in a bag. Mary Ellen's hands slowly tightened around her knees. My tribe called me weak. Saad, I brought this shame by trusting whites, but I didn't trust anyone, not then. Not after. He looked up, and for the first time his eyes met hers without the wall between them. All my people are bones now. Burned or buried, she swallowed, throat tight. For a long moment she couldn't breathe. Then I thought I was the only. Ghost left. Neither of them said anything after that. The next morning, Mary Ellen knelt beside his satchel, rummaging carefully through her dress's inner lining. From the fabric she pulled out a small worn kit, her father's, thread, a few needles, scissors with rusted tips. So's tunic was torn across the shoulder from their crawl through the briars. She reached forward, hesitated, then gently tugged the edge of the rip. He allowed it. She stitched without a word, lips pressed tight, eyes focused. When it was done, he nodded once. She nodded back. They moved quietly through the hills that day, traveling east. On foot now, Tahoe had set the pony loose to avoid drawing attention. The terrain was dry, scattered with thornbrush and snake. Tracks. He showed her how to walk without breaking twigs, how to feel the wind before it changed, how to follow deerscat to water. She listened, watched, learned that night as they sheltered beneath an overhang near the riverbed, a crack of gunfire echoed in the far hills. Mary Ellen bolted upright, gasping. She clutched her sides and began to cry, not loudly, but with the kind of trembling that came from deep memory. Soho didn't say a word. He placed his hand gently on her shoulder, that was all. But it was enough. There were no words between them. But there was something else, something older. By the fifth day, they reached the high ridge above Red Earth Canyon. It was said to be cursed ground, where settlers were ambushed in the early years of the railroad path. Now it was barren, scarred by wagon ruts long forgotten. They crossed quietly, So's eyes scanning the ridgelines. Then hooves Mary Ellen froze. Soho gripped her arm and pushed her against the rocks. 4 riders crested the hill to their right, dirty coats, guns slung low. One of them leaned forward, squinting. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, voice curling like a sneer. "Ain't that the squaw bait we left for the dogs?" Mary Ellen stepped back. "And that," the man said, pointing with the butt of his rifle, "is the Comanche dog who took our bait?" They kicked their horses into a charge. Soho pulled her back fast, dragging her into a dry arroyo lined with brush. "Run," he said, shoving her toward the rocks. She stumbled but obeyed. He turned to face them, knife drawn, eyes calm. They surrounded him. Mary Ellen crouched behind a mesquite thicket, heart pounding, breath trapped in her lungs. Dust swirled. As the horses reared, a shout, a scream. One of the men raised a rifle, then a shot cracked the air. Everything turned to silence. The bullet struck Soho just above the knee, spinning him sideways into the dust. He hit the ground hard, one arm outstretched, his knife tumbling from his grip. Blood poured dark and fast through the torn fabric of his pants. 2 of the riders were off their horses in an instant, boots crunching toward him. Mary Ellen screamed from the rocks, scrambling to her feet, but a 3rd man grabbed her by the arm and yanked her forward. She kicked, bit, cried out, but he was too strong. He dragged her down into the clearing where the others were already tying a rope. "Well now," one of them sneered, tightening the knot. "Seems fitting, don't it? Let the savage swing. Where he found you, a full-circle sermon." Soho struggled, teeth gritted, trying to rise, but a boot slammed into his back. One of the men spat beside him. "You side with dogs, girl, and you'll get their fleas." Mary Ellen fought against the grip on her, her breath coming in short bursts. "Let him go!" she cried. He saved me. You left me there. The rider twisted her wrist hard enough to make her gasp. They looped the noose around So's neck. One pulled the rope taut over the limb of the same twisted tree. Another hauled him up slowly. His feet scraped the dirt. His eyes fluttered. She screamed again, but this time she didn't wait for mercy. Mary Ellen broke free in a burst of fury, throwing herself toward the dying fire where the riders had left their camp burning. She grabbed a smoldering log thick, flaming at one end, and spun. With a roar she didn't know she had, she hurled it at one of the horses. The beast screamed, rearing up. The rider fell backward, cursing. The others turned too late. Mary Ellen darted toward Soho, drawing the knife from her boot, the one he gave her when they first set out walking. Her hands were shaking, tears streaming from her dirt-smeared face. She slashed the rope. Soho dropped like a sack, wheezing, clutching his throat. "Come on," she whispered hoarsely. "Get up, please." A pistol fired behind them. The shot missed, sparking off a rock. She turned, arm outstretched. Found a pistol on the ground one of the men must have dropped. She grabbed it, fired once into the air. The recoil nearly knocked her back. "Move!" she screamed at the air. Soho coughed, one hand clutching his neck, the other pressing to his bleeding leg. But he got to his feet, barely. They ran. Branches tore at their faces. Rocks slipped beneath their boots, blood and breath and pain, but they ran. They didn't stop until the brush swallowed them whole. By nightfall they'd reached the river, a slow-moving current, cool and silver beneath the stars. Soho collapsed beneath a tree, legs shaking, soaked in sweat. Mary Ellen fell beside him, dragging the canteen from her shoulder. She poured the last of the water into his mouth. He swallowed, eyes glassy. She tried to bind the wound, pressing cloth to it, tying it tight with her belt. It wasn't enough. She knew that. He did too. He opened his hand. Inside was the bone-handled knife. "Go east," he rasped. "Find the trading post. Say nothing of me." She shook her head fiercely, tears slipping free again. "I'm not leaving you." His voice was barely a whisper now. "You were never mine to keep." She held his face in her hands, lips trembling. He smiled faintly. "But you were mine to save." The river hummed beside them. The wind was soft. As the first rays of morning bled through the trees, Mary Ellen leaned down and pressed her forehead to his. They stayed that way for a long time. Then, with the quiet finality of a leaf letting go, he exhaled, his eyes closed. And the forest went still. Some are born to fight. Others are born to forgive. But the rarest are born to do both. If this story moved you, please like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more powerful historical stories.